Hugh, I have used the whole issue of free will as a wonderful probe to understand human consciousness, and if you believe in God, even how God relates to it. Free will is just wonderful. You've focused on free will and aspects of it in much of your scholarly career. You're a participant in the Big Questions in Free Will project. What is the specific project you are working on, and what are some of the issues that you're facing right now in trying to make some kind of progress?
Well, the title of the proposal that I wrote for the Big Questions in Free Will project was the title was Free Will for Theists. Right? And the real question is, how would one approach the subject of free will if one took a theistic perspective on it? Now, this could have something to do with whether God has free will, which is actually further down the way in the project. The real questions are, how does one think about our own freedom if one takes a theistic perspective? So we're thinking, how is it that we would think about it if it was from a theistic perspective? Mm-hmm. Well, part of the question is, what is it to be responsible and to take responsibility for ourselves? One way to look at the Adam and Eve story is to make it out that original sin was Adam and Eve deciding, well, look, we're going to take responsibility for ourselves here. We're the ones who are going to settle our destiny and get ourselves knowledge of good and evil and become like God and so forth. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense in which taking responsibility for yourself can be an act of pride. But there's also a better sense, and that's a sense in which we acknowledge the things that we do as being our own, as decisions that we've made, actions that we have performed, right, and for which we are answerable in the sense that if there is a price to be paid or an apology to be made, that it's ours to do, and that the only way that we can come to grips with ourselves and what we are and what we've made of ourselves is to move forward in such a way that we acknowledge what it is that we've done in the past, good and bad.
Entirely reasonable, but
right.
Why does that have any greater purchase under a theistic worldview than under an atheistic worldview?
Well, I think there are probably two or three things you could say about that. One is to realize that from a theistic perspective, there is a providence of God that is behind what we are and what we are to become, so that it's easier for us to face up to what may be our own spiritual needs or the shortcomings in our actions, because from a theistic perspective, you have a God that you can pray to, that you can depend upon to as it were, help you come to grips with.
When you're using the term God's providence in that context, that adds a special dimension. Is that something that is a desire on God's part to have us go in a certain direction? Is that the providence, or is the providence something that God has set so strongly that we are doing it in a kind of a predestination sense? Because both views have been theistic views.
Well, I don't think that I would want to address it if we're talking about it from the individual perspective. I think that we don't think about things in a predestinarian way. What we think about is, how am I to go about living my life and dealing with the concerns that I have. So then if you ask, okay, is there some way that God figures it? Is there something that he wants, right? Well, the classical picture on this is that God wants to extend us a sort of personal friendship that we can begin participating in this life, and that we do so in the religious perspective. We do so by acknowledging our need for God, in essence, that we are not able completely to govern ourselves in the way that we want to, right? And to depend on God's assistance for doing it. So from the religious perspective, there's that. But there's a larger dimension to it in that one imagines that God has certain things that are being accomplished in creation. One of them may be achieving some sort of conquest over evil, right? Both in ourselves and in others, so that, traditionally we've always said, well, one does God's will by helping out the people who are downtrodden, doing things for the poor, educating people who need to be educated. well, the sort of thing that we call doing good, all right? But the doing good part is I think from a theistic perspective, that is part of a partnership that we have.
What issues are you wrestling with that you hope to make some progress on during the period of this project?
Okay. One issue is to talk about how it is that our decision-making relates to the reasons that we have for deciding the way we do. So if you come up to a point at which you have to make a decision, you've got sometimes reasons for doing one thing, reasons for doing another thing. You have to settle between them. Right? And the question then is, how is it that the reasons are related to the decision? If you are a believer in libertarian free will, you don't think that they're causes. You think they're something else. And so then you ask yourself, well, what does it mean to decide for one reason rather than another if it's not something causal? And I think that that's part of what I want to talk about. The idea that I have on it is that what it means to decide for one reason rather than another is simply that you form an intention that reflects the one reason rather than the other, right? So if I decide to come to Birmingham, where we're having our conference, if I decide to come to Birmingham in order to participate in the conference, then part of my intention in coming to Birmingham is participating in the conference. I could have come to Birmingham to go to the Madonna concert, but I didn't. And that might have been a reason I had at the time, all right? But I didn't. Well, okay, if I decide for the one reason rather than the other, then that reason is going to be reflected in my intention, whereas the other one is not.
What's the significance of that?
Okay, well, that gives you a non-causal account of what it means to decide for one reason rather than the other. Because you simply take the content of the desire, all right, the contemplated end, and you simply take that and you reform it into an intention, right, so that your mind is doing a certain kind of information processing. It's taking a thought that comes to you in the shape of a desire and a way to achieve the desire, and you simply then recast that as an intention. So one thing I worry about, or would like to be able to say more about, is what it is to decide to do something for one reason rather than another. And one wants a causal account of this. So suppose we ask, let's say I have more than one reason for deciding to take a vacation in Italy next summer, right? One might be to tour some sites and look at some churches and some museums and so forth. Another might be to enjoy the food and the wine and so forth. And you ask yourself, okay, if you have both these reasons for doing it, and let's say you decide for one reason, but not for the other reason, what does that mean? Well, what that means to me is that when you form the intention to go to Italy, you're forming certain intentions about what you're going to do there. So if you decide to go to Italy for the sake of the food, then your intention is to go to Italy for the sake of the food. Or your intention is to dine well while you're there. Whereas if you decide to go to Italy because you want to visit San Marco and Florence and look at the frescoes there of Fra Angelico, well, then that's your intention, right? And if you go and you don't get to see the frescoes, then you're going to be disappointed, regardless of how well you dined while you were in Florence. Whereas if it's the other way around, then what's going to disappoint you is missing out on the fine restaurants, whether you catch the frescoes or not. So that's the sort of thing that shows you what it is to decide to go to Florence, let's say, for one intention or for one reason, rather than for the other reason. So that's one of the issues I want to talk about.
Any other issues that you're wrestling with?
Yeah, one is what it is, why we hold people responsible in a free will setting. Okay, and this I'm very up in the air about. We say that we blame people or reward them or punish them or praise them in order to influence their conduct. But if you're going to be a libertarian about free will, then you're not thinking of that as a causal process exactly. And yet we still think that by visiting hardship on people, which is what we do when we punish them, or by visiting some good upon them, which is what we do when we reward them, we still think that we can influence their conduct. And that is a bit of a mystery to me. It's exactly why it should be. It is that way, but the question is why it should be that way. What happens when a person, as a result of encountering hardship for something that they did, why is it that they change? Which, of course, they need not. They may not always change. But when they do, why do they? What exactly is the effect that has on people? And, of course, praise has the opposite effect. And I don't really know exactly what the I don't want to say mechanism exactly is, but I don't understand the ordering of that cause and the consequence that it has, or that input and the consequence it has. I'd like to see a little bit, or think a little bit more about it, and to be able to say a little bit more about it, because no matter whether you're a libertarian or a determinist, you still have to have some account of what it is to hold a person responsible, what it is to hold oneself responsible, and how it is that those mechanisms work and lead us to do the things that we to alter our behavior in the ways we do. And I simply don't understand it.